World leaders are sharing mixed reactions to President Trump's attack on globalism during his United Nations address. The president highlighted his America First policies during yesterday's speech, saying the future belongs to patriots. New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is among the leaders in New York for the UN General Assembly. Her country, as you know, got global attention for implementing strict gun control measures after the mosque shootings in Christchurch back in March. Earlier this morning, we spoke to her in an exclusive interview about her closed-door meeting with President Trump this week and what he thinks of New Zealand's gun laws. Word is that our president did express interest in the measures that you implemented. What can you share with us about that meeting?
Well, there have been those who have been interested in what happened in New Zealand. Obviously, after the 15th of March, where 51 lives were lost from our Muslim community, the sentiment was really clear. We are a country who has legitimate use for guns. Our farming community, particularly for pest control and animal welfare issues. But there was a real line in the sand moment for us as a nation, and a question was asked, you know, why does anyone need military-style semi-automatic weapons or assault rifles? And so that's where we drew the line. Within 10 days, we announced that those laws would change. Within a month, roughly, it was done. And now we're in the middle of buying back all of those weapons, and we've had 20,000 of them returned and over 70,000 parts.
But you've done that, but we haven't done that here in this country. What did he express an interest in what you all were doing? Did he ask you questions? Yeah,
we had a policy discussion. He was interested in how it had worked, how it had been received. And there are a few countries, and I reference the fact we weren't the first. Australia, after a particularly horrific massacre, did the same. And I think that points to the fact that in both countries we had these moments in time where our people our people just said this isn't right, and there was almost unanimous support in our parliament. Everyone, bar one member of parliament, voted in favour for what we did.
Did you get the impression he wants to do that here?
I got the impression he was interested. Okay. I would be second-guessing anything beyond that.
You said you do not understand why the U.S. has failed to change gun laws.
Well, all I know is how New Zealand responded and how New Zealanders felt. And when they heard that someone had been able to access those guns legally and then make a very simple modification to those guns to make them absolute killing machines. We are a pragmatic people, and I think the response was, well, surely there's a way we can try and prevent that happening in the future, whilst at the same time maintaining legitimate use for legitimate users.
On that point, when ideas like buybacks and gun bans come up in this country, one of the criticisms, and I know you've heard it in your country as well, is, look, law-abiding people are going to give you the guns back, but the criminals and the potential terrorists, the people you don't want to have these weapons, it's not like they're going to listen to the ban.
Well, I mean, one of the points that we've tried to make, of course, is that there's only a very small proportion of people who are licensed ever commit crime, a small portion. But if their guns are not stored properly, cared for properly, they are the ones that can still enter into the black market. So there is a connection there.
Are you punishing law-abiding citizens while letting the criminals continue with their criminal activity?
No. I mean, certainly the perspective we've had from those who have been part of the buyback is they see this as the right thing to do. And in Australia, you know, they did see results off the back of their buyback scheme. And so I look to them and see that that was a positive experience for them. And for us, actually, there is just no rational reason to have these in circulation. We didn't even know how many we had. But the fact we've had 20,000 return for a small country of less than 5 million people, that's a big result for us.
During his speech at the UN yesterday, President Trump said wise leaders always put the good of their own people and their own country first. What do you see the role of the U.S. in the world as right now? And
every leader comes to the UN and puts their position, and all I can do is put New Zealand's. And we are a fiercely independent nation, and of course, as any leader, I feel the draw to make sure that I do my best on behalf of New Zealand. Mm-hmm. But perhaps because of our isolation, we're also very aware of how the actions of others impact on us. So we take a global view and we see the impact of our actions on others, be it climate change, be it issues like nuclear testing. Mm-hmm. We are increasingly connected, so you can be loyal and focused on the best interests of your nation whilst also understanding that what we do affects others. And I think that's the perspective of New Zealanders.
Sometimes our president has been criticised for what is seen as divisive rhetoric in this country. How do you think it's viewed on the international stage?
Well, look, increasingly, I think, and I'd make this statement about any of us. You know, even if you're from a smaller country like New Zealand, you can be shot onto a platform depending on what's happening in your corner of the world. The point I've tried to make is that increasingly we're actually all amplified within each other's borders. So nothing that we say within our own countries anymore is just limited to that. We all hear each other now, and our peoples feel the effect of that. And I don't say that to point to any one leader. Actually, that's a duty of care that we all have. And in this borderless world now, I think we need to be mindful that other countries hear it, kids hear it, and our words, they have impact.
Does that mean that the anti-immigrant, strong border rhetoric you hear in this country and you hear from our president could have an impact on your security, stirring people up in a way that could harm?
Look, I think the point that I would draw back to is, again, just New Zealand's experience. The alleged terrorist on the 15th of March was Australian, not from New Zealand, hadn't grown up there, made a decision for several reasons that New Zealand was going to be his target. But we are increasingly a borderless world. Radicalisation and extreme views can be sought and found anywhere via the internet, regardless of where you live. And so I think we need to start thinking more often about the impacts and the ramifications of that.
The Christchurch shooting was live streamed by the shooter. So you created the Christchurch call to action.
Yes.
And basically challenging to help eliminate terrorist rhetoric on the internet. Are the leaders of online companies, are they responding?
They are. You know, I think actually, if you start with a simple premise, like should we have violent extremism and terrorism online, the murder of 51 people broadcast live, no one's going to think that anyone has the right to do that. And so that was our starting point. And I found the tech companies completely engaged. Of course, they want to make sure that they maintain a free and open, secure platform for people, but they can also see there's a line to be drawn. And so they've been really constructive. We've now generated some tangible outcomes, one of which is a crisis protocol, basically a civil defence response. If this ever happens again, that we can respond quickly.
You're right, of course. It is a remarkable thing to state out loud that Facebook live streamed the killing of 51 people. And yet, the U.S. government has not signed on to this call to remove extremist content. What's the rationale that you've heard?
Oh, look, there might be many reasons why they haven't formally signed on, but actually in reality...
What did they tell you?
Actually, in reality, they're being engaged. In reality, they have been working really constructively with us. You'll see the time that the call was released, they actually made a supportive statement. So I understand that there may be issues around free speech and otherwise, but actually it hasn't stopped the practical partnership we've been able to form.
Only 23 of the 193 UN member states have female leadership.
Yes.
Why do you think the number is so low? And what do you think, are there consequences when you don't have more female leaders?
Well, I'm
hello, female leader.
Yes, hello.
Yes, hello, female leader.
I'm not particularly inclined to try and create this rare species or this clique. You know, and I think there's lots of reasons. You know, I reflect back in my own region. We're doing what we can to lift the pipeline. I mean, ultimately, if you're going to have female leaders, you need female members of parliament and female politicians. It's not a particularly enticing place to be. And so my starting point is how can we make politics feel like a place where you can make a positive contribution? And so that's part of my philosophy, is to tell the stories of why and how we can do good.
But for you, Prime Minister, people doubted your age. They doubted your experience. They doubted whether you could do this job. Did you ever doubt that yourself or have second thoughts?
So did I. So look, I'm not going to criticise anyone else for thinking like that. Oh, but look, in fact, you know, that's actually a perspective that so many women take. You know, when I think about Helen Clark, I've had, of course, you know, I'm the third female Prime Minister. When I think about Helen Clark, who was a past leader, she even talked after she left politics about questioning whether she had the credentials to then go and work at the UN. There is, I think, a natural tendency, particularly for women, to wait until they have every skill required. And so it's about looking past that.
So how did you get through that yourself?
I knew that a job had to be done And I did absolutely believe I could do it. I did.
But to Gayle's question before, what do you think the consequences for the entire world are when we have so few women leaders?
Well, I firstly wouldn't want to make an assumption that just because you're a female that you'll produce particular political outcomes or policies. Everyone comes from their own perspectives. But, you know, there will, and I don't mean to draw too many assumptions, but there will be times when we might choose to do things differently. And everyone brings their personal experience to the table. And so particularly, you know, I think if you come as a mother, as a carer, then that will influence the way you look at the world and issues. One
of the most talked about, probably the most talked about moment at the UN this week has been the speech by Greta Thunberg, a 16-year-old, challenging the leaders of the world.
As she well should. Do
you think she made an impact?
Yes, I do.
Do you think the world leaders heard her?
Well, I certainly did. And I'd like to think that we had heard her some time ago, but it was whether or not everyone that need to hear at any given time were all in the room. We need to hear that generation, and they don't want speeches. They do want to know that we're taking it seriously.
But on the subject of taking it seriously, we're at a moment where global emissions, which warm the planet, continue to go up in your country and ours.
Yes.
A report came out just this morning suggesting 1 billion people could be affected by rising sea levels tied to global warming. Your daughter, my children, our families, how are they going to judge this generation, your generation of leadership, on their action on climate change?
Well, harshly if we don't act, which is why, you know, I'm really proud of what we've managed to do in a short space of time. Half of our emissions come from our food production. So we're trying to lead the way in becoming the most sustainable food producer in the world. And if we figure out how to do that, then we've got technology and practice that we can share with the rest of the world. But ultimately, this is something that we don't have a lot of time, but no one should feel powerless. Even if a political leader of any given country isn't taking the action that the citizens expect you can at state level, at company level. Of course, the private sector has a huge role to play here. No one needs to feel like they have to stand still and wait for political leadership. There's something that all of us can do on this.
I want to ask one more question about guns, because I marvel how you were able to change the laws in 10 days. How were you able to do that, and what kind of opposition did you have to it? You've touched on it briefly, but what did you say? What did you do?
Well, all up with our parliamentary process, it took, in the end, just a bit longer than that. But you're right, within 10 days, we announced the change and the plans for the change, and we got the ball rolling. Do you know, I have to say, when I was first briefed on the guns that were used by the alleged terrorist and how easy it was for him to obtain those guns, I didn't check with Parliament whether or not I would have enough votes. I just went down and said gun laws need to change, and they will, and felt assured that if the rest of the country and my fellow parliamentarians knew what I knew, that they would be with me, and they were. We are a pragmatic people, and when we had that experience, we were united in wanting to see change.
All right. How's Neve?
Very busy.
Very busy. We remember that made national news when she was born because you brought her to work, and that was, well, look at her.
I worry if I brought a toddler now, there would be other national news out of that.
Thank you so much for taking the time. I know you've got a busy day.
Thank you. Thanks to yours.